The bus doors hissed open and Violet Dye stepped inside, exhaustion weighing down every step. The crisp night air outside was in stark contrast to the warm, stuffy interior, filled with passengers lost in their own weary silence. She clutched her bag tightly, scanning for an empty seat. Her head ached as the city lights blurred past the fogged-up windows. 12 straight hours of endless reports, back-to-back meetings, and the pressure to prove herself at one of the most prestigious media firms had drained every ounce of energy from her. Her feet throbbed, her eyelids felt impossibly heavy, and the world around her seemed to spin. Then she spotted it. A single empty seat in the middle of the bus. Without hesitation, Violet sank into it, exhaling in relief. It wasn't until she settled in that she noticed the man beside her. Ralph Kingston, CEO of one of the largest media empires in the city. But Violet had no idea. To her, he was just a stranger in a dark dress shirt, his presence calm yet distant, emerald eyes fixed on the city rushing by outside. Not that she had the energy to care. As the bus rumbled forward, she let her eyes flutter shut, telling herself she would only rest for a moment. Sleep claimed her faster than she expected, and before she could even realize it, her head had fallen against the shoulder of the stranger beside her. Ralph Kingston felt the slight weight lean against his shoulder. He frowned instinctively, turning his head, only to find a young woman fast asleep, her chestnut hair falling loosely over part of her face. His first instinct was to pull away, but something made him pause. She looked exhausted, her breathing soft and steady, eyelashes fluttering slightly as if lost in a deep dream. A closer look revealed the faint shadows beneath her eyes, a telltale sign of long sleepless nights. Ralph exhaled quietly. He didn't usually take the bus, but tonight he just wanted a moment of peace. A day filled with high-stakes meetings, crucial decisions, numbers, and contracts. It was all too much. He needed an escape, even if just for a little while. And now, on this ordinary late-night bus ride, a complete stranger had fallen asleep on his shoulder, completely unaware of who he was. The bus jolted over a pothole, but Violet remained asleep, unconsciously shifting closer against him. A loose strand of hair slipped across her cheek, and Ralph noticed just how unguarded she was. How long had it been since he'd seen someone trust the world so easily? The quiet hum of the bus engine filled the silence. Ralph turned back toward the window, a barely noticeable smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. Something about this night, about this moment, felt strangely different. The bus came to an abrupt stop. Violet jerked awake, her mind still clouded with sleep. It took her a few seconds to realize that she was leaning against someone, and when she glanced up, she froze. Her eyes widened, her heart pounding. She had just fallen asleep on a stranger's shoulder. But before she could react, her gaze snapped to the window. The scenery outside was completely unfamiliar. Her stop had passed. No. She scrambled for her bag, reaching for her phone in panic. In her rush, her elbow knocked into the cup holder beside her. The lid popped off. Dark liquid splashed across Ralph's crisp white dress shirt. Violet stared in horror. "Oh my God," she gasped, fumbling for a handful of napkins from her bag, hands shaking as she tried to blot the stain. "I'm so sorry. I swear I didn't mean to. I'll pay for dry cleaning or buy you a new one." Ralph said nothing, simply glancing down at the spreading stain before looking back up at her. The silence stretched, and Violet felt like she was seconds away from spontaneous combustion. Then, unexpectedly, Ralph let out a low chuckle. A warm, amused, completely unbothered laugh. "Don't worry about it," he said smoothly, a flicker of amusement in his emerald eyes. "I think I owe you anyway, after that rather comfortable nap you just took." Violet's face burned red. He was teasing her. Groaning, she buried her face in her hands, mortified beyond belief. The bus came to another stop, and without thinking she grabbed her bag and bolted off, her heart still racing from sheer embarrassment. It wasn't until she was standing on the sidewalk, catching her breath, that she realized something. She hadn't even gotten a proper look at his face. Violet stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the blazer over her blouse. She couldn't afford any mistakes today. After weeks of hard work, today was the big intern presentation. She had spent countless nights refining her project, hoping for a chance to prove herself to the executives. If she did well, she could secure a full-time position at the company. Grabbing her laptop, she rushed out of her apartment, completely unaware that the man whose shoulder she had slept on last night was the one who would decide her future. The glass-walled conference room was filled with quiet murmurs. Violet took a deep breath, scanning the room. Other interns sat nervously, whispering among themselves, while the executives at the head of the long table radiated power and authority. She barely had time to find her seat before the main doors swung open. The entire room went still. Ralph Kingston walked in. Violet forgot how to breathe. No way. The man she had fallen asleep on last night, the man whose shirt she had ruined with coffee, the man who had teased her right there on the bus, was the CEO of this company. Ralph strode to the front, his dark suit crisp, no sign of the coffee stain from the night before. His piercing gaze swept across the room. If he recognized her, he gave no indication. Violet, on the other hand, wanted the earth to swallow her whole. Her heart pounded as Rafe took his seat, exuding effortless authority. "Good morning. Let's get started. I'm looking forward to hearing what you've prepared." His voice was deep, steady, commanding. Violet swallowed hard. This was not how she imagined today going. One by one, the interns presented. Some stumbled nervously, others were more composed. Then it was Violet's turn. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. "Good morning. My name is Violet Dye, and today I'll be presenting a digital marketing strategy designed to enhance our engagement with Gen Z consumers." As she spoke, she slowly found her rhythm. The nerves faded, replaced by confidence. She laid out her data, highlighted key trends, and proposed an innovative campaign. By the time she finished, the room was silent. Then polite applause. Violet exhaled, until Rafe leaned forward. "Impressive presentation," he said casually, "but I have a question." Violet tensed. Of course he did. "You mentioned that our current strategy isn't resonating with younger consumers," he said, "but our engagement on social media has actually increased by 27% last quarter. What data did you use to support your claim?" Silence. The interns exchanged nervous glances. Violet held her ground. Yes, engagement rose by 27%, but primarily due to short-term influencer collaborations. However, long-term brand loyalty has declined by 15%. My research focuses on retention rather than just short-term reach. A beat of silence. Then Ralph smirked slightly. "Well argued," he nodded. Violet released the breath she didn't realize she was holding, but as she returned to her seat, she still felt his gaze on her. And in that moment, she knew he remembered her. Violet had barely recovered from the intensity of the presentation when the meeting ended. She had held her ground against Ralph's question, but that didn't mean she wasn't rattled. As she gathered her notes, a voice called out behind her, "Miss Violet Dye?" She turned. One of the senior executives stood there, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Kingston would like to see you in his office." Violet's heart nearly stopped. Around her, other interns turned to stare. They had heard. The whispers began. "She's getting called in? Did she do something wrong? Or is it something else?" Violet forced herself to stay calm as she nodded and followed the executive. The CEO's office was on the top floor, offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. But Violet barely had time to process the grandeur, because Ralph Kingston was standing by the window, hands tucked into his pockets, gazing out at the city below. She stood at the doorway, pulse racing. She had never been this close to him before. Ralph didn't turn around immediately. A long moment of silence stretched between them, the muffled sounds of traffic the only noise in the vast office. Then, at last, he spoke. "Do you always handle pressure that well?" His tone was calm, but there was a flicker of amusement behind the question. Violet steadied herself. "Only when the person asking is trying to throw me off." Ralph chuckled, a rare and unexpected sound. Finally, he turned, arms crossed over his chest, those piercing green eyes filled with something unreadable. "I reviewed your presentation," he said, "and I have an offer." Violet blinked. "We're developing a new strategic project," he continued, "and I want you on it as my temporary assistant." Her mind whirled. "Assistant? To you?" "Only for the duration of the project," Ralph clarified. "I need fresh insight, and your presentation proved you think differently. I want that." Violet felt the ground shift beneath her. She had worked tirelessly to make an impression on the executives, but she never imagined the CEO himself would be the one to request her. And then a nagging doubt crept in. "Why me?" she asked, meeting his gaze. "There are plenty of other qualified interns. You could have chosen anyone. Why me?" Ralph was silent for a second. Then, the corner of his lips lifted slightly. "Because you're interesting." The answer completely threw her off. But then, she inhaled sharply. This was the biggest opportunity of her career. She nodded. "I'll do it." Ralph nodded approvingly, but there was something unreadable in his expression. Violet had no idea that from this moment on, her life was about to change forever. Working as Ralph Kingston's temporary assistant wasn't easy. Within just 1 week, Violet realized that working under him was unlike anything she had ever experienced. He was sharp, precise, never satisfied with good enough. "This analysis is decent," Ralph remarked as she presented a report. "But I don't just want to know what our competitors are doing. I want to know what they're not doing." Violet gripped her pen tighter, struggling to keep up with his thought process. Ralph didn't just want ideas. He wanted innovation. And the most terrifying part? He never repeated himself. Under immense pressure, Violet quickly adapted. She learned to think faster, work smarter, and present her ideas in the most compelling way possible. Despite his high expectations, Ralph wasn't unfair. When Violet did well, he acknowledged it. "This report has some interesting insights," he said one day. "You're starting to understand how I think." Violet stared at him, momentarily stunned. Was that a compliment? But before she could react, Ralph had already moved on, fully focused on the next task. Working with Ralph was intense, but there were moments that made Violet forget he was a powerful CEO. One late afternoon, after hours of work, Violet absent-mindedly yawned while reviewing a document. Without looking up from his laptop, Ralph suddenly said, "I'm waiting." Violet blinked. Waiting for what? Ralph glanced at her, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "For you to fall asleep at your desk. Should I get you a pillow this time?" Violet froze, then her face turned crimson. "I am never going to live this down, am I?" she muttered. Ralph simply chuckled. "Not a chance." Violet hid behind her laptop, trying to ignore the strange warmth spreading in her chest. Violet had adjusted to working with Ralph, but the world around them wasn't quiet. Rumors spread faster than she expected. She gets to work directly with the CEO? Why her? She was probably chosen for her looks. Come on, don't tell me there's something going on between them. Every time she walked through the office halls, she could hear the whispers. She tried to ignore them, but she couldn't deny that they started to chip away at her confidence. One morning, as Violet entered the meeting room, she overheard a hushed conversation. Let's be real, if she wasn't pretty, would she even have this opportunity? Violet froze mid-step, her chest tightening. She had worked tirelessly, spent sleepless nights researching, poured everything into the project, and all they saw was her appearance? That night, as she stared at the report on her laptop, she didn't feel proud of her work anymore. For the first time since she started, she wondered, did I really earn this? Violet sat in front of her computer, staring at the email she had just received. Subject, job offer, marketing associate position. Message, we are highly impressed with your credentials and would like to offer you a position on our team with a competitive salary and rapid growth opportunities. She read the words over and over, feeling a mix of excitement and uncertainty. This was everything she had worked for, a prestigious company, better pay, and a promising career path. But there was one problem. Accepting this job meant leaving, not just the company, but also leaving Ralph. Violet tightened her grip on her phone. her thoughts in turmoil. She knew she had to talk to him. That evening, Violette knocked on Ralph's office door. "Come in," his deep voice called out. She stepped inside, her heart pounding as she found him seated at his desk, flipping through a thick stack of documents. Ralph glanced up when she approached, his sharp gaze instantly locking onto her. But when he saw her expression, he paused. "What is it?" Violet took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay steady. "I got a job offer." Ralph didn't react immediately. He placed his documents down, leaned back in his chair, and studied her. "A job offer?" he repeated slowly. "Where?" "A major firm," Violet replied. "Higher salary? More growth potential?" A long silence stretched between them. Ralph nodded, but his eyes remained unreadable. "Congratulations," he said, his tone even, emotionless. Violet didn't understand why her chest ached at those words. She hesitated before asking the one question that mattered most. "Do you think I should take it?" Ralph held her gaze for a long moment. Then, he inhaled deeply, looking away. "I think this is what you've worked hard for," he said carefully. "You deserve it." His voice was steady, controlled, but his fingers tightened ever so slightly on the edge of his desk, as if holding something back. He was right. Every word he said was right. So why did it hurt so much? She had thought he would say something else, that he would tell her to stay. But Ralph didn't. So Violet nodded, trying to ignore the disappointment creeping into her chest. "Thank you," she murmured. Then she turned and walked out of his office, leaving Ralph alone in the quiet. Months had passed since Violet Dye left, and by every measure of success, she had achieved everything she had worked for: a better job, a higher salary, and a promising future in the media industry. People said she had made it. Colleagues admired her, her boss valued her, and her career was thriving. But why did it feel so empty? Every morning, she told herself she had made the right choice, that she was on the right path. But every night, alone in her apartment, she realized her heart had never really left, because it was still with him. One Monday morning, Violet walked into the office like usual, but as she sat at her desk, she noticed an envelope placed neatly on top of her files. There was no sender's name. Her heart pounded as she carefully opened it. Inside was a single bus ticket for the same bus route from that night, where everything between them had begun. And tucked inside was a small note, with only one sentence. "I'm still waiting for you on that bus. Don't fall asleep this time." Her fingers trembled slightly as she held the paper. She didn't need to ask who sent it. Her heart made the decision before her mind could protest. She shot up from her chair, grabbed her coat, and ran out of the office. Violet raced through the city, her breath uneven, her pulse hammering. The world around her blurred, the honking cars, the hurried footsteps, the flickering neon signs. She wasn't thinking. She was just running, heart pounding, with only one thought in her mind. She had to get to that bus stop. And when she reached it, he was there. Ralph Kingston stood among the crowd, hands in his pockets, his expression calm yet unreadable. Violet froze, her heartbeat thudding painfully. He was still here, still waiting, as if he had always known she would come. Her breath caught, but this time she didn't hesitate. She walked straight toward him. And before Ralph could say a word, Violet threw herself into his arms, holding onto him like she never wanted to let go. Ralph wrapped his arms around her tightly, his breath warm against her hair. "I'm not leaving this time," Violet whispered, her voice trembling. Ralph exhaled, as if he had been holding his breath for months. His arms tightened around her, anchoring her in place. "And this time," he murmured, his voice raw with emotion, "I won't let you go." And there, amidst the bustling city, amidst the rushing people, nothing else mattered but this moment. This time, they weren't letting love slip away.